Welcome aboard Rocket Ship, the platform with the most relevant content for competitive examinations. This is Rocket Ship IAS Lab, and continuing with our series on answer writing for general studies papers of civil services main examination. We take up a question that you might come across in GS paper 1. Please read out the question carefully. In last two generations, what changes you notice in Indian families that have affected the position of women in family? So this is a classic contemplative type of questions that UPSC throws at you. What we essentially mean here that these questions require you to do some thinking before you go on to write your answer. The beauty of these type of questions is they actually give you ample opportunity to display that you think beyond the obvious. However, if you haven't practiced beforehand about these sort of questions, not exactly the same question but about these sort of questions, you won't be able to attempt them to, you could say, certain degree of quality in the actual exam situation. So time and again we emphasize on regular practice, regular answer writing practice. Anyway, as you can see, the question requires you to talk about not only the changes in the last two generations, but also it requires you to connect those changes with the effect they have on the position of the women in the family, that is women's position in the family. With this, we are introducing our answer with making an observation that is actually a well-known fact about the Indian society. That is, the Indian society is a primarily communitarian society where community exercises primacy over the individual. You would probably appreciate that unlike some of the societies, for an example, the American society, where the individual's rights, liberties, etc. have, you could say, greater importance compared to the, you could say, the will of the community. In India's case, it's slightly different. Here, the community has primacy over the individual. More emphasize concern for friends and family, collective good and responsibility towards the community. Despite increasing recognition of individual choices, the family still remains the organizing unit of Indian society. You can connect these points, that is India being a communitarian society and the family rather than the individual being the organizing unit of Indian society, coming to the modern times, that even in the modern times the family remains the primary organizing unit of Indian society. Nevertheless, the family itself is evolving, that is the family too is undergoing a change in response to stimuli presented by the changing society. One of the more noticeable variables is the position of women in the family. That is, as the society itself is changing, there is certainly some change being observed in the women's position in the family. So how the women's position in the family is in flux, basically how is it continuously changing? Coming to this very important and you could say well noticed point, that there is a preference for nuclear families. That is, basically the society has turned towards nuclearization of families, unlike the earlier days joint families. This has indeed meant greater autonomy and decision making freedom for women, as we would see later, that unlike in a joint families where a young daughter-in-law, mostly a young daughter-in-law, has to defer to the, you could say, wishes of her mother-in-law, or for that matter some older matriarch like her older sisters-in-law. In a nuclear family, it's generally the daughter-in-law, now turned the mother, who has the greatest amount of say, especially about the family matters, the internal matters of the family. This actually is a reflection of her greater agency that she is enjoying. There is decline in fertility rates and number of children, and this you can understand very well. This frees the woman from her responsibility of child rearing, so that she can devote more time for professional and educational opportunities, exploring professional and educational opportunities. And as she becomes more professionally accomplished and she becomes much more well educated, she generally acquires greater deal of empowerment, agency, etc. There is greater acceptance of women working outside rather than her remaining only a homemaker, only a housewife. Now she is actively supposed to contribute to the finances of the family. This has led to an economic empowerment for women in the family, and as you can understand very very well that in the modern society it's generally the economic power that decides the one's you could say relative position in the society, and in this case also the family. Again, this has been another observation, that is women headed households are actually increasing in proportion in the villages as well. You can appreciate this point very very well, that as men folk are migrating to these cities, to the urban areas, mostly due to better employment opportunities, or even for you could say distress migration, it's generally the women who are left behind in the villages who are now going on to lead the families, lead the households. Basically the households are becoming women headed. However, many scholars have actually pointed to this condition. They are not entirely sure, actually they are not entirely sure that it has indeed resulted into empowerment for the women as well, as we would discuss through our lecture, that the phenomenon of women headed households in the villages has not probably led to an empowerment for the women. Anyway, the point is, the 2011 census found out that more than half of the families self-identified as nuclear families. That is, families which comprised of parents and their children, basically two generations. The nuclear family is freed of control of the matriarch, often the mother-in-law or an older female like the sisters-in-law. This grants greater agency and freedom to the mother. However, please try to connect these 2 points, that the nuclear family, the nuclearization of families has also led to the phenomenon of empty nest syndrome. That is, where the old parents are left behind in the ancestral home, feeling neglected and unappreciated. Moreover, in the absence of financial autonomy, the old females have to share an extra burden. You can understand very very well that even till now, you could say the status of social assistance in India, especially old age pension, is not up to the mark. That means women who have generally lacked financial agency, economic agency, are in a worse position when they are old. When they are older, the older woman is in a worse position due to her lack of financial autonomy. This has often meant that the nuclearization of family has had, you could say, has proved to be far better for the daughter-in-law, and it has also meant, you could say, the mother-in-law is in a worse of position. Anyway, the point is the society is in flux, and in future we would see all of these turning for better. Basically, nuclearization of the families would turn for better for the you could say women actually. Then the decline in fertility and the number of children parents will have frees women to pursue professional and educational opportunities. This strengthens the women's position in family and in the society far and wide as well. No one is going to argue against this point, that the professionally accomplished female, someone who is well educated, has, you could say, greater deal of power actually. There is more acceptance of women working outside. In fact, women are expected to contribute financially to maintain the lifestyle the family aspires for. You can understand very very well that cities do not allow you to actually sit at home, because you have to even work harder just to maintain your present day lifestyle. That means generally women too are encouraged for working outside. unlike the earlier preference for, you could say, a housemaker, you could say women as a housemaker, a housewife. Right nowadays actually the women are actually encouraged to work outside and contribute to the family's finances. While, and please try to appreciate this nuance, that while working women indeed have greater say, they have to still carry on with household work. Unlike the men, the women are actually, they are actually forced to, they are meant to carry the dual responsibility. This phenomenon of dual responsibility, it is mostly supposed to be borne by the women. That is, they are not only considered to say their professional responsibility, to actually bear the professional responsibility, but also do the household chores. So basically this has meant that they have a dual responsibility. This puts women in much stress compared to the men. However, we must add here that the modern day life is stressful for everyone, mostly even for men, but it has put the women in a worse of position. Anyway, with migration of men to cities, villages have increasing instances of women-headed households. In the villages, this phenomenon has been pointed by economic survey as well. The economic survey raised this point that ironically the programs meant for farmers rarely reach women, who stand as substitute for their husbands, as they are not registered as owners in land records. Again, this phenomenon has been called feminization of agriculture or farming, feminization of agriculture or farming by economic survey. And actually the issue economic survey was dealing with, that while the women are indeed contributing to the you could say agricultural economy, whatever the program the government makes for the farmer is not reaching to the women, because they are not registered as owners in the land records. So this is the point, that while the migration of women has indeed meant that women are heading the households in the villages, but still there are some gaps that remain, and even the economic survey has raised some concern about the phenomenon of feminization of agriculture. So this was all on the changes in the society in the last 2 generations and how they have affected women's position in the family. This is all for today. We would reassemble for the next lecture in a few days. As usual, we wish you all the best. Thank you.